Today I'm doing something a little more lively. Right in front of you is a Dell Inspiron 157567. It's an older laptop, emphasis on the word older because it's not exactly old, it's literally just older. I believe it came out sometime in 2017 as that's when all the reviews for it are dated. Before we get into specs, what am I doing here today? Well, about a year and a couple months ago, my family purchased a 4K TV. And while I don't know what particular TV it is, I do know it's an LG TV and that it can reach up to 4K itself as well as 120 Hz. It also has an option for 60 FPS interlace, which I found out works nice on older 360 titles that are capped at 30 FPS. And I believe it upscales as well. All in all, it's nice TV, but for some reason my Xbox won't go up to 4K, only 1440p. It's an Xbox One X for your information. Windows does though. I think you can see where this is going now. Basically, I'm gonna see how this older laptop performs in 4K. Now, what's actually in this thing? With this version of the laptop, you get a GTX 1050 Ti 4GB, 8GB of DDR4 RAM, an Intel Core i5-7300HQ quad-core with 2.5 GHz, and a 256GB SSD. However, I've since then added more RAM, so now it's at 12GB, and I also upgraded the SSD to a 500GB one, as well as added a 500GB hard drive. So it's been upgraded to a degree, but nothing that will impact performance too much. In terms of the actual specs though, the 1050 Ti at this point is getting a little outdated for today's games. Albeit, this is a laptop version of the card, but even the base version of the card can still be a harder sell. I can't tell you much about the i5 as it's more of a laptop specific version, but I can thankfully say it's not exactly a low-end i5. I think nowadays it's more of a budget-directed version. Since 4K is coming closer and closer to replacing 1080p, I thought why not jump on that trend as well, at least for some time. Now on launch, this laptop was still labeled as a budget laptop, as the 1050 Ti when it was released was not labeled as a powerhouse card, but instead a budget card. So the same goes for the laptop, a budget one more suitable for 1080p. But I still think this is a well worth a shot just to see how it performs. Here's a list of games I want to test. I'm going to try and run them on at least 4K 30 FPS. If we can manage that, then we'll talk about 60. Now what's the deal with these games? Well, we have Half-Life 2, which just feels right for something like this. We actually have 3 categories. Well, maybe 3. Category 1 is late 2000s, early 2010s games. These are the ones that I feel would run best with 4K, as most of these games are pretty easy to run. Then we have games from 2015, 2016, which when it comes to this laptop are more suited for 1080p but not 4K, which is why I want to test this area out. Then the last category I'm debating on doing is 2020 games, or around that era. 2 examples I have for this are Black Ops Cold War and Doom Eternal. Now I've run these games on this laptop before, but not at 60 FPS or at 4K, so if I decide to go through with this section, it will be very interesting to see how it turns out. Nonetheless, let's get the first games installed. Please excuse the lower quality phone footage. So as it turns out, I could not test Doom Eternal due to the fact that at the moment, I can't link my Steam account with my Bethesda one, so that's just a no-go for now. And I also don't feel like installing Black Ops Cold War again, so that's out of the picture as well. The replacements are Mafia Definitive Edition and Second Extinction. Odd replacements, but I need something right then and there. I'm only able to film this at night due to too much glare during the day, as well as much worse lighting. So I'm planning on doing 3 nights worth of filming, and on those nights, I will be doing one of each of these categories. Also, I'll be using an Xbox controller because I don't want to drag a mouse and keyboard out there, as well as have that many wires for your information. For a game to pass this test, it basically has to be playable at 4K. That essentially means 27 to 30 frames or more. Settings can be whatever, high or low, just as long as the game runs in 4K. In front of you right now is my vague prediction for the performance of each game. So now that everything's been properly said, let's start the testing. Unfortunately, you will have to excuse the low quality still. Instead of recording in 4K, I record in HD, both 60 FPS. I should have stuck with 4K instead, my apologies. I did reshoot some games though, just for better quality. Also, I need to warn you that I've not used an Xbox One controller in months. The closest thing to one that I have used would be a PS Vita. Now Half-Life 2 ran as great as you'd expect from such a well-optimized title. At 4K max settings, it ran with a frame rate averaging around in the mid-70s. The lowest it would be was low 30s, but this would only really happen if you stood directly in front of fire. Overall, performance was great. Left 4 Dead 2 at max settings 4K was a bit more trouble. This game is obviously known for huge waves of zombies on screen at any given point, but under the surface there are also a lot of other complex systems running. This results in an okay experience with 4K at max settings. The frame rate shifted throughout my testing and was pretty much low 40s to low 30s, but not steady enough to be mid 30s. Low settings proved to be a much more viable option, as the averages went up to low 70s to high 60s. The frame rate would still drop to low 50s and high 40s, albeit during rare occasions. During the cola segment, I put the settings back to the maximum and saw an average of mid 30s to high 20s. Max settings were okay and lowest settings were great. Black Ops 2 Zombies at 4K max really at times looked gorgeous. I feel the game truly benefited from 4K. The frame rate at the max settings, however, was mostly low 30s to mid 20s, which for something like this is not the most ideal. Running it at its lowest, however, gave us a frame rate in the mid 50s to low 60s, with stutters down to the high 40s. The campaign, though, was much worse. On the level I chose, 4K max gave us a frame rate of around 5 frames, unplayable pretty much. However, with the game's settings at its lowest, it gave us a frame rate in the mid 30s to high 20s, with stutters going down to the teens that broke up gameplay. Serious Sam 3 Fusion and Ultra settings shifted from low 30s to mid 20s, with dips to the low 20s at more intensive moments. However, the game at its lowest ran at an average of 110 to 105, which was a much more welcome frame rate. Albeit, this was during a section that wasn't the most intensive, but is still definitely worth mentioning. This by far, though, was some of the best performance in all my testing. Unfortunately, AVP 2010 had almost the opposite story. At 4K max settings, its frame rate was mostly in the low 20s to high teens, which for a game like this, especially the Predator campaign, is not really something you would want, considering how fast-paced it can be. Later on, I booted up the Marine campaign with the game at its lowest settings, and stayed at a much more playable mid 30s to mid 40s, with dips to the mid 20s as well. This was a much more acceptable experience than at its maximum. Finally, we move eras and we start with Shadow Warrior 2. And I honestly think this game looks gorgeous in 4K. However, that comes at the cost of a frame rate running in the mid-teens at max settings. With everything on its lowest, we get a frame rate in the mid-20s. Either way, neither frame rate is really too acceptable for a game like this. On to MW Remastered, and we really start to push things a bit too far. Max settings gives us an average frame rate of 5 frames because this game just looks amazing. Luckily, on its lowest, we get a frame rate that ranges between the low 40s and low 30s, which is just playable enough. The whole time I was wondering if certain parts really looked better than the original at its maximum settings, because the whole thing was really just a mixed bag. Really quickly, does anyone just miss this game's campaign? And I mean specifically this one, not the rest of the Modern Warfare series. The whole vibe it gives off, I just love to death, honestly. Now on to Doom 2016, another big one for 2016. With max settings in the menu, I was getting 20 frames, which all I had to do was render some smoke. This clearly was assigned to turn the settings down to its lowest. On its lowest, we got a frame rate that would stay between the mid to low teens. With the resolution scale turned down to 50, we get a frame rate in between the low 40s to low 20s. Ideally, you would want 60 frames for a title like this, so 4K was just flat out a no-go, as the shifting impacted gameplay too much. Let's jump back a year to Black Ops 3. This I only need to test on its lowest because that was already bad enough. Originally, it got a frame rate between the high teens to low 20s, but as I got further into the round, it went down to the mid-teens. Not at all ideal for a title like this. Finally, we have Battlefield 1, which I've wanted to test for a while, but there are quite a few hurdles to it. Nonetheless, here we are. If my previous experience had taught me anything, it's that 4K max would be a no-go for this game, and I was right. Because at its lowest settings, we get a frame rate mostly in the low 20s to high teens, but there are plenty of times where it'd go down to the mid-teens and stay there. It didn't take much testing for me to be sick of this. With Battlefield, you're gonna want at least 30 frames. Lastly, there's Deathloop. Mafia 1 DE and Second Extinction would not boot up, and at this point, I was about done with this whole thing. From here on out, I pretty much knew what to expect, that being that not even low settings will cut it for this machine, and of course that was the case. I got an average of 10 frames, and really only need to record for 2 minutes, as that gave me enough info. This makes it the quickest game I recorded so far. So what's the main takeaway from all this? It's that the terms 4K, budget, and 2017 really don't belong in the same sentence. You would have more luck with 4K and budget nowadays than in 2017 with good reason. 4K is still working its way into the mainstream, again with the current consoles helping it get there. Nonetheless, at the moment, I can't keep up and really shouldn't try. Good old 1080p will serve just fine for now. But in the future, I, like many others, do plan to jump on that train as well. One of the main points of this video, like I mentioned earlier, was for it to be a lot more lively. And by that, I mean using footage that I record myself as opposed to downloading it off the internet. And while I won't always use this method of video making, for a project like this, I think it fits well enough. Nonetheless, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little experiment.